Hello all you mayhem makers, I'm Mindy with Quilting Mayhem and welcome back to another Kona block of the month. We are on month 4 and we're going to start out the first step. It's very common in most of the blocks, making that half square triangle. So we're going to do 2 sets where we have a light color and a dark color together, diagonal line through the middle, and do that 1/4 inch seam on either side of the line. You then will cut it apart, press it, trim it. Okay, step 1, we've done this. Easy peasy, right? The next one we are doing flying geese. Okay, some people fear these. I love them. I am doing them just kind of the traditional way, where you are going to take a light or white background rectangle. You'll then, for each geese, have 2 of these color squares, and you're just going to start out. So you're going to put one on here, and you're going to sew on that diagonal line that you'll draw on this square, from that outer center or down the center to the middle. Okay, you're going to start there, and then we'll trim it and add the next one. So when you trim it, make sure you're doing just a 1/4 inch from the line that you sew, and then you'll press it open. And so I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. All right, so once you sew it and press it, it looks like that. All right, then you're going to take that second square and you're just going to place it on the opposite side, have that diagonal line that you're going to draw, and sew on the line from the outer corner to the center and stitch it so it will look like this, right? So then you'll trim it and press it open. So I'll show you real quick what I mean. So making sure you have 1/4 inch from that sewn line, all right? And you press it open and it gives you flying geese, right? Easy, simple. Do them one at a time, and you should get this nice 1/4 inch where it meets in the bottom. All right, if you don't quite get that, then most likely your seam allowance is not quite at a 1/4 inch, or maybe that scant quarter. Go that little bit inside the 1/4 inch. That will help you get that nice 1/4 inch meat at the bottom center. Okay, so that was step 2. Step 3 for the block is essentially the first step of the flying geese repeated and done, kind of mirror images. So you're going to have matching pairs of different colors, but you're only doing that first step, right? So you're going to have, you know, your rectangle and sew on the line on that diagonal from one end to the other, but you want to make sure that when you do them, each one mirrors or is the opposite direction on that diagonal seam. So this is important. Make sure either lay them out separately so that you make sure that one seam is going one way and the other seam is going the other way, or they're not going to do what they need to do in the block. So just make sure that each color of squares you're doing has, you know, a mirrored mate as you go, and then you're just pressing them open or to the dark side, whichever way you want to press, but making sure you get those mirror images however you want them. All right, so you're going to do your sets of those, and then we'll get to the most complicated block. Still one of my favorite blocks. I love it. This one hasn't been trimmed, but we're going to make these 1/4 square triangles. I just love them because they do look super complicated, but they're not really complicated, because you're just going to start out like a half square triangle. Okay, light fabric, dark fabric, diagonal down the middle, 1/4 inch seam on either side. All right, so just like your half square triangles. All right, and then you're going to cut them apart, and then I'll show you what's next. So I'm gonna separate this block, press it, and then I'll show you the important part. All right, so when you do the first step, you're gonna press them, and you're gonna with 2 half square triangles. Okay, don't trim these. You want that extra so that when you make it into a 1/4 square triangle, you still have room to trim, and everything's gonna come out nice and even. So don't bother trimming, it's not necessary. So what we'll do is they're going to go right sides together, opposing. So you want to make sure that the light is going to go against the dark, and then the opposite, the dark is going to go against the light, and you're just going to match up those 2 seams as best as possible at either end. And sometimes, especially if you're new, pin them. So I'm matching at the top, and I even can kind of peel it back to make sure these 2 seams are lining right up, because that's the most important part. And then when we get to the other side, we're doing the same thing. We're just kind of matching corner to corner. Now it may not match exactly because we haven't trimmed, and that's okay because we want excess, but we want to make sure we have an even amount of excess on either side. Same thing, I'm peeling it back, looking at how that seam matches up. It looks pretty good. I'm going to pin it, and then what we'll do is draw a diagonal line this way. So you're going to go through essentially to dissect that seam, because if you go this way you're just going to get the same thing again. So making sure that diagonal line that you draw is through the intersection of that seam. And we can move you down here, ignore the rest of the mess in the sewing room, and notice I have excess here, and it's okay. But I'm kind of looking, I'm peeking here, and it looks like, yep, everything's going to line up. So then take your ruler and just best line up your diagonal here and your points. So these points here, and draw that diagonal line. And like I said, don't worry that there's not the same amounts here, because in the end we should have excess. We're going to trim all these little dog ears off, all right? And then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to do a diagonal line through 1/4 inch off either side of this line before you get to this piece. I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so here's how we show it to you. Diagonal line, 1/4 inch either side. Now, before you cut them apart, feel free, you can peek. And look, I mean, I'd say that's pretty spot on. Same here, all right? If it's just a skosh off center, please let it go. It'll be okay. If it's way off, then feel free, you know, pull apart those seams and then start over. But then you can cut them apart, press them, and then you're going to trim them. And let me show you how to trim. All right, so we'll come back down here, because this may be probably the trickiest part if you're new. Get some of this other stuff out of the way, because you now have 2 diagonals, right? So the key is going to be, let's see if I can scooch as close as possible and hope that you can still see. So we need a 4.5 inch block. This is a 4.5 inch creative grid. One diagonal is going to follow this diagonal seam through the block, right? And then notice the corner of my 4.5 is over here. I need to try to scooch it, and you want to line up as best as possible without running out of block these opposing corners, okay? So get them onto these other diagonal line as best as possible, and then trim it. There shouldn't be a whole lot to trim, but just a little bit. This is why, if you're following my instructions with my cutting, you'll have extra. If you follow what they're doing with triangles and all those kinds of things, hopefully it's all lining up for you and working out, since you're working with that bias. But if it's not, you may want to try this method of doing the half square triangles into 1/4 squares. And then there it is. We've got our nice center here. We're meeting at all 4 points. This is what you want, okay? So hopefully yours are turned out like these, because like I said, I love these, but it does take some finessing. Ignore the sewing room, right? Oh, I love these. So you're going to do these in different colors, so you just follow the directions as to which squares you're using, and then trim them up. So that's what I'm going to do with these, get them all trimmed up, and then we're going to be ready to lay out the block. And so you're going to have all kinds of pieces and parts. This one's pretty in depth with different components, which is nice. We're getting kind of more skilled, we're learning more things, it's getting a little trickier, definitely not boring. So let me get everything trimmed up and ready, and we'll lay it out and get this block put together. All right, so you're going to take all your pieces and parts and you're going to start laying them out like this. And I don't have quite enough space on my table here. But, so your half square triangles are in these outer corners. We'll make sure they're facing outward. You have these kind of half flying geese are here. Your main flying geese make your star in the middle. You have white background squares that you cut, one main center square, and then your quarter square triangles are kind of here in the middle outer portions. And then it tells you to start sewing them together in rows. So we'll go across each row this way. Okay, so I just go from left to right, start putting my pieces together, and then I'll start putting my rows together, top to bottom. So let me start getting some rows together. I'll show you what it looks like. Oh, and make sure when you're laying them out, like these units are coming together at a point, like they're kind of kissing together, because if you lay them the other way, they're going to look funky. So just kind of remember, lay it out, compare it to your photo, make sure it looks the way your photo looks, okay, as you go to put it together. All right, so we have our rows together, like this, right? And then we're going to start just matching them together. Now, I will suggest that you match up and pin each of these seams where they join, especially if you're new, because you want your joins to all match up nice and pretty so that your block turns out nice and square, because that is the goal in the end. Have a nice square block. So I'm just matching each seam, and then I'm going to sew down this seam. And if you're really new to quilting, I will suggest you even pin this end here to make sure that it lines up where it belongs. Now, if you wanted, you could do the top 2 rows and then you can match up the bottom 2 rows and work your way to the middle, which is probably what I will do, but I'm going to start with this one, get it together, do this one, iron, and then we'll join in the center. All right, so I'm going to take it to the machine. All right, so just so you can see what I'm talking about, so I sewed these 2 rows together and these 2 rows together. So I kind of have top and bottom portions, and then I have the center row. And now I'm going to just match one of these up, pin matching those seams, and then I'll press it and put that bottom one on, and we'll have the block done. So it is very important to match these seams. You just want to make sure your block turns out nice and square. If you want to make sure all your points match up, those kinds of things. Making sure you pin and match seams as you go is very important to make sure that you get this. And make sure that you have that nice straight edge on your block in the end, so it turns out the correct size that you need it. So it'll match up with all your other blocks. All right, so I'm going to take this to the machine, line up this edge, and I'm just going to start sewing my seam, and real soon we'll have a block. All right, so there we have block 4. Love this. So hopefully yours is turning out just as nice as this one is. If you have any problems, questions, make sure you reach out and you ask. You can email me, Mindy at Quilting Mayhem. You can call the shop. You can message through Instagram, Facebook, all those kinds of things. And make sure that you're subscribing to our YouTube channel to keep up with all the videos and those kinds of things. And otherwise, I hope you have a lovely day and keep on stitching.